The concert was already over. The crowd was still roaring. But behind the stage, in a quiet hallway no one was watching, Michael Jackson heard something that stopped him in his tracks. A child was crying. Not the kind of cry that comes from excitement or awe, but the kind filled with fear, pain, and exhaustion. Michael froze. He turned away from his team, ignored the schedule, and followed the sound. What he discovered backstage that night had nothing to do with fame, music, or performance. And what Michael chose to do next was never written in any plan, never approved by security, and never meant to be seen by the public. Yet years later, the people who witnessed it would say the same thing. That was the moment we understood who Michael really was. Why was the child there? What had happened to them? And how did Michael's response quietly change a life forever? Stay with this story, because what happened next reveals a side of Michael Jackson the cameras almost never captured. The concert had ended in a storm of light and sound. Tens of thousands of fans were still screaming Michael Jackson's name as the final echoes of music faded from the stadium. Confetti drifted slowly to the ground. The massive screens replayed highlights of the show. Spins, moonwalks, perfectly timed poses frozen like art. Backstage, everything moved fast. Assistants shouted instructions. Security formed corridors. Dancers laughed, hugged, collapsed from exhaustion. Sweat, adrenaline, and triumph filled the air. Michael Jackson walked off the stage quietly. As always, the moment the spotlight disappeared, so did the noise inside him. The performance was over, but the weight remained. His chest rose and fell slowly as he loosened one glove and nodded politely to people congratulating him. Great show, Michael. Incredible as always. Record-breaking crowd tonight. He smiled softly. He always did, but his mind was already somewhere else. As he turned down a narrow backstage hallway, one not meant for artists, but for staff and storage, he heard it. A sound that did not belong. A cry. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just broken. Michael stopped walking. His security team continued a few steps before realizing he wasn't behind them anymore. Michael? One of them called back. He raised a hand gently, signaling them to wait. The cry came again. It was the sound of a child trying not to be heard. Michael's heart tightened. He turned slowly toward the sound, his eyes scanning the dim hallway. The lights here were softer, flickering slightly. The roar of the crowd was muffled, replaced by distant echoes and humming equipment. Another sob. That was it. Michael didn't think. He didn't ask permission. He simply followed the sound. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if instinct was pulling him forward. He passed stacked cases, cables, and used lighting rigs. The hallway narrowed, and then he saw them. A small child sat on the floor beside a metal equipment crate, knees pulled to their chest. Their face was buried in their arms. Their shoulders shook as they cried silently, trying to disappear into the shadows. Michael froze. For a split second, he wasn't a global superstar. He was a child again. A child who knew that sound. A child who had cried like that once. Quietly, alone, unseen. He lowered himself slowly, careful not to scare them. "Hey," he said softly. The child flinched. They looked up, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. It took a moment for their brain to register what their eyes were seeing. Michael Jackson was kneeling in front of them. The child's mouth opened, but no sound came out. Michael noticed immediately the hospital bracelet on their wrist, the oversized hoodie, the thinness of their arms, the way their hands trembled. He knew. He didn't ask yet. He just stayed at eye level. "I'm sorry," Michael said gently. "I didn't mean to scare you." The child shook their head quickly, wiping tears with the sleeve of their hoodie. I wasn't supposed to be back here," they whispered. Michael smiled softly, the kind of smile that didn't demand anything. "That's okay," he said. "Neither was I, technically." That earned the smallest, almost invisible smile from the child. "What's your name?" Michael asked. The child hesitated, then answered quietly. "Ethan." "That's a good name," Michael said. "I'm Michael." Ethan let out a tiny, shaky laugh. "I know." Michael nodded, pretending this was the first time he'd ever heard that. They sat in silence for a moment. Michael noticed the way Ethan kept glancing toward the end of the hallway, like he was afraid someone would come and take him away. "Are you here with someone?" Michael asked gently. Ethan nodded. "My mom. She works cleaning after shows. She said I could wait near the stage because I wanted to hear the music." Michael felt something twist in his chest. "And," he prompted softly. Ethan looked down. "She got busy, and security told me to move, and I got lost." The words came out fast now, like he'd been holding them in. "I tried not to cry," Ethan added quickly. "I really tried." Michael's eyes softened even more. "You did a good job," he said, "but it's okay to cry too." Ethan sniffed. Michael glanced down the hallway. He knew his team would be panicking by now. He knew protocols were being broken, but he didn't move. "Did you like the show?" Michael asked. Ethan nodded, eyes lighting up for the first time. "It was the best thing I've ever seen," he said. "I've watched it on videos, but live is different." Michael smiled. "I'm glad you were there." Ethan hesitated, then asked a question he had clearly been holding back. "Do you get scared before you go on stage?" Michael laughed softly, not the polished laugh the world knew, but a quiet, honest one. "All the time," he said. Ethan's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" Michael nodded. "Every single show. But you don't look scared." Michael leaned in slightly. "That's because sometimes bravery isn't about not being scared. It's about going on anyway." Ethan stared at him like those words mattered more than anything else he'd heard all day. Before Michael could say anything more, footsteps echoed at the end of the hallway. "Michael!" A security voice called, panic creeping in. "There you are." The guard stopped short when he saw the child. Michael raised a hand calmly. "He's with me," Michael said. The guard hesitated, unsure what to do. Michael stood slowly and offered his hand to Ethan. "Would you like to come with me?" he asked. "We'll find your mom together." Ethan looked at the hand, then up at Michael. Then, without hesitation, he took it, and as their hands connected, Michael felt something shift inside him. He didn't know yet that this small moment, this unplanned pause in a dark hallway, would become one of the most important nights of his life. He only knew one thing. This was no longer just about a lost child. Something bigger had already begun. Michael Jackson held Ethan's hand as they stepped out of the narrow hallway and back into the controlled chaos of Backstage. The moment they appeared, everything shifted. Security froze. Assistants stopped mid-sentence. A production manager opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. No one was prepared to see Michael Jackson walking calmly through the backstage area with a small child beside him, their fingers tightly intertwined. "Michael, we need to," one of the guard began. Michael turned his head slightly, his expression gentle but firm. "He's lost," Michael said. "We're finding his mother." That was all. No argument followed. People moved out of the way instinctively, like water parting around something sacred. Ethan stayed close to Michael's side, still half convinced that this was a dream he might wake up from at any second. He glanced around at the equipment, the cables, the massive crates labeled with tour names and cities. "I've never been back here before," Ethan whispered. Michael leaned down slightly. "It's loud, isn't it?" Ethan nodded, but not like the crowd. "It's busy loud." Michael smiled. "That's a good way to put it." They walked slowly, much slower than the pace Michael's team was used to. Every few steps, someone approached with urgency written all over their face. "Michael, the car is ready." "Michael, the press." "Michael, you're already behind." Michael heard them. He always did. But tonight, something else mattered more. He knelt again, right there on the concrete floor, ignoring the stairs. "Ethan," he said softly, "do you know where your mom might be right now?" Ethan thought hard. "She said she'd be near the loading area, the one with the yellow doors." Michael nodded. "That helps." He stood and looked at one of the guards. "Can you clear a path to the loading area?" "Yes, sir," the guard replied immediately. As they walked, Ethan finally asked a question that had been burning in his chest. "Why are you helping me?" he asked quietly. Michael didn't answer right away. He waited until they reached a quieter stretch of hallway, where the noise faded into a low hum. Then he said, Because someone once helped me when I was scared and alone. Ethan looked up. Who? Michael paused. My mother, he said, and sometimes strangers who didn't have to care but chose to. Ethan nodded, accepting the answer without needing more details. They reached the loading area. The yellow door stood open, revealing a maze of trucks, crates, and workers in reflective vests. The air smelled like metal and fuel. Michael scanned the area carefully. Mom. Ethan called, his voice trembling. Nothing. He tried again, louder this time. Mom. Michael felt Ethan's grip tighten. It's okay, Michael said quickly. We'll find her. And then he saw her. A woman stood near one of the trucks, frantically talking to a supervisor, her face pale, her hands shaking. That's her, Ethan whispered. Before Michael could say anything, Ethan pulled free and ran. Mom. The woman turned. For half a second, she looked confused. Then she screamed his name. She dropped everything and ran toward him, wrapping her arms around him so tightly it looked like she was afraid he might disappear if she let go. Oh my God, Ethan, where were you? I looked everywhere, I thought. I'm okay, Ethan said quickly. I'm okay. She pulled back just enough to look at him, checking his face, his arms, his legs. Then she noticed who was standing a few steps behind them. Her breath caught. Her knees nearly gave out. Oh my, she stammered. Mr. Jackson, I'm so sorry. I never meant for her. Michael raised his hands gently. You don't need to apologize. Tears streamed down her face. I lost him, she whispered. I turned my back for 2 minutes. I was terrified. Michael nodded slowly. I understand. She looked down at Ethan. Were you scared? Ethan hesitated, then shook his head. I was at first, he said, but Michael stayed with me. The woman pressed a hand to her mouth. Thank you, she said, her voice breaking. Thank you for not walking past him. Thank you for stopping. Michael smiled softly. Anyone would have, he said. She shook her head. Not everyone does. A heavy silence settled. Then one of Michael's assistants cleared their throat. Michael, we really should go. Michael glanced at Ethan. Ethan looked back at him, suddenly unsure. Michael knelt one last time. I'm glad you came tonight, he said. And I'm glad you're safe. Ethan swallowed. I'll never forget this. Michael smiled. Neither will I. He stood and began to turn away. But Ethan spoke again. Michael? Yes. Ethan hesitated, then asked, Do you ever feel lonely? The question hit harder than any scream from the crowd. Michael looked at him, really looked at him. Sometimes, he admitted. Ethan nodded like that answer mattered. Me too, he said. Michael knelt again, despite everything. Then remember this, he said quietly. You're never as alone as you think. Ethan smiled. Michael finally turned and walked away, his team closing in around him. But as he moved toward the exit, something inside him felt different, lighter and heavier, because he knew, deep down, that this night was not finished with him yet. He didn't know it would follow him for years. He didn't know it would change the way he saw his own life. All he knew was that one small cry had cut through the noise of the world, and he had listened. Michael Jackson sat alone in the back of the car as it pulled away from the arena, the roar of the crowd still echoing faintly in the distance. The window beside him reflected his face, pale, tired, thoughtful. He barely noticed the flashing lights outside or the constant hum of traffic. His mind was still in the loading area, still kneeling on cold concrete, still holding the hand of a frightened child. He closed his eyes. Moments like that stayed with him longer than sold-out shows or standing ovations ever did. Michael, his longtime assistant Grace, said gently from the front seat, Are you okay? He opened his eyes slowly. Yes, he said, just thinking. Grace hesitated. You scared everyone back there. Security, management, they weren't happy. Michael smiled faintly. I know. You disappeared, she continued. Protocols were broken. Schedules ignored. People are already talking. Michael leaned his head back against the seat. They always talk. But Grace wasn't finished. This time it's different. Someone filmed you. Michael turned his head. Film me? Yes, she said carefully. With the boy. Someone in the loading area. It's already online. The car felt suddenly smaller. What are they saying? Michael asked. Grace glanced at her phone. Some are calling you irresponsible, saying you endangered yourself. Others are saying, well, she paused. Others are saying you saved him. Michael looked out the window again. Both can be true, he said quietly. By the time he reached home, the world had already decided to have an opinion. Headlines began to appear within hours. Michael Jackson breaks security to help lost child. Dangerous or compassionate. Pop icon defies protocol. The moment Michael Jackson ignored fame. Michael didn't read most of them. He never did. But the calls came anyway. Managers, lawyers, advisors. Each voice carried the same concern wrapped in different words. You can't do this again. You put yourself at risk. People will take advantage. You don't know who that child was. Michael listened politely. Then he said the same thing every time. He needed help. Late that night, long after the house had gone quiet, Michael sat at the piano in his living room. The lights were dim. The air felt still, almost reverent. He pressed a single key. Then another. Soft, uncertain notes filled the room. He wasn't writing a song for an album. He wasn't thinking about charts or critics. He was replaying the boy's voice in his head. Do you ever feel lonely? Michael stopped playing. Lonely. The word echoed louder than any crowd. He thought of his own childhood. Endless rehearsals, bright lights, the constant pressure to be perfect. He thought of how often he had been surrounded by people yet felt unseen. He whispered to the empty room, I know that feeling. The next morning, the backlash intensified. A television panel debated his actions like a moral puzzle. He's reckless, one commentator said. He's human, another replied. Social media split into sides, those who praised his compassion and those who questioned his judgment. Michael watched none of it. Instead, he asked Grace to help him find something. The boy, he said. Ethan. Grace looked surprised. Michael, that's not a good idea. Privacy laws. I don't want to contact him, Michael clarified. I just want to know if he's okay. Grace made a few calls. Later that afternoon, she returned with a soft smile. He's fine, she said. His mother wanted me to tell you. He hasn't stopped talking about you. Michael exhaled, relief washing over him. He said you made him feel safe. Grace added, that he wasn't scared anymore once you took his hand. Michael closed his eyes. That mattered more than anything else. But kindness always has a cost. 2 days later, a meeting was called Emergency Mandatory. Michael sat at the long table while executives spoke in clipped, controlled tones. You can't keep acting on impulse, one said. You are a global asset, another added. Every move you make has consequences. Michael folded his hands calmly. You're talking about me like I'm a product, he said. An uncomfortable silence followed. We're talking about your safety, someone replied. Michael looked up. So was I. They didn't understand. How could they? They saw numbers, contracts, risks. He saw a child alone in a world that doesn't always stop when someone is afraid. That night, Michael wrote in his private journal, a habit he kept away from cameras and headlines. If I stop listening to cries because it's inconvenient, I become the kind of adult I was once afraid of. The story refused to fade. Weeks passed, yet people still talked about the Lost Boy incident. Parents wrote letters thanking him. Children sent drawings. Some messages were angry, others full of gratitude. Michael kept one letter on his bedside table. It was written in uneven handwriting. Dear Michael, I wasn't scared anymore when you came. Thank you for holding my hand. Love, Ethan. Michael traced the letters gently with his finger. He had performed for millions. But this was different. One evening, as he watched his own children play in the next room, Prince laughing, Paris reading, blanket curled up quietly, something inside Michael shifted. He realized something simple and devastating. The world expected him to be larger than life. But moments like that night reminded him he was still just a man, one who could choose to be present or walk away. He chose presence, and whether the world applauded or criticized him for it no longer mattered, because somewhere out there, a child knew that even in the loudest place on earth, someone had listened, and that, to Michael Jackson, was worth everything. The applause eventually faded, but the silence that followed lingered far longer than anyone expected. Michael Jackson felt it everywhere, backstage in hotel hallways, inside meeting rooms where conversation stopped the moment he entered. It wasn't hostility. It was something more uncomfortable. Uncertainty. People no longer knew how to approach him. Some looked at him with admiration, others with concern, and a few with something close to fear, not of him, but of what he represented. A man who refused to follow the invisible rules that govern fame. Michael noticed it immediately. At rehearsals, dancers hesitated before speaking. Crew members double-checked every instruction. Security stayed closer than ever, their eyes scanning constantly, as if waiting for the next unpredictable moment. He hated that, not because it restricted him, but because it changed the atmosphere. Fear had crept in where trust used to live. One afternoon, during a break in rehearsals, Michael sat alone on the edge of the stage, feet dangling, staring at the empty seats. Thousands of them, all identical, all silent. "This place feels different now," he said softly. Kenny, the creative director, approached carefully. "Different how?" Michael thought for a moment. "Heavier." Kenny nodded. "People are worried about you." Michael turned to him. "Or worried about what I'll do next?" Kenny didn't answer. That was answer enough. Later that evening, Michael returned home earlier than planned. He walked through the quiet rooms, listening to the faint sounds of his children upstairs. Their laughter floated down the hallway, light and unburdened. He stopped, leaning against the wall. That night in the arena replayed again in his mind, but this time, not the moment he found the boy, the moment after, the stillness, the collective breath held by thousands of people. They hadn't known what would happen next. Neither had he. He realized something then. Silence made people uncomfortable, especially when it came from someone the world expected to always perform, always entertain, always be predictable. Michael had broken that expectation, and now the world didn't know how to react. The next morning, an envelope waited on the kitchen table. No return address. Inside was a single piece of paper. "You reminded me why I believe in people again." No signature. Michael read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in his pocket. That same day, a scheduled interview was canceled without explanation. Then another, and another. Publicists told him it was temporary, a cooling-off period. Michael understood the unspoken message. Stay quiet. Let the noise die down. But quiet had never been his strength. That afternoon, he visited the children's wing of a hospital. Unannounced, unofficial, without cameras or press. He wore a simple black jacket, sunglasses pulled low, a medical mask covering half his face. Only a few nurses recognized him. One of them whispered, "Thank you for coming. Some of them really need this today." Michael nodded. "So do I." He spent hours there. He listened more than he spoke. He knelt beside beds, asked about favorite cartoons, favorite animals, favorite dreams. He signed drawings. He laughed softly. He held hands. No one filmed him. No one posted headlines. And yet, this felt more real than any stage he'd ever stood on. As he prepared to leave, a young nurse stopped him. "Mr. Jackson," she said hesitantly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course," he replied. "Why do you do this?" "You don't have to." Michael thought of the arena, the boy, the silence. "Because someone once told me I mattered," he said, "and it changed everything." That night, he slept better than he had in weeks. But the world outside was still restless. A week later, an internal memo circulated among executives and security teams. New rules, stricter boundaries, zero tolerance for unscheduled interactions. Michael read it quietly. Then he folded it and placed it on the piano. "I won't sign this," he said calmly. The room froze. One executive cleared his throat. "Michael, this is for your protection." Michael stood. Protection from what? From danger? Michael met his eyes. Or from being human? No one answered. The meeting ended without resolution. Word spread quickly. Michael Jackson was becoming difficult. The label followed him like a shadow. Difficult because he stopped mid-performance to help someone. Difficult because he refused to ignore pain. Difficult because he listened. Late one evening, Michael sat with his children in the living room. Prince was doing homework. Paris was sketching. Blanket rested quietly beside him. Michael watched them closely. "Dad," Paris asked suddenly, "why do people argue about you?" Michael smiled gently. "People argue about things they don't understand." "Do they understand you?" Prince asked. Michael paused. "Some do," he said. "Some never will." Blanket looked up. "Do you care?" Michael shook his head slowly. "I care about you." That answer seemed to satisfy them. After they went to bed, Michael stood alone by the window, city lights stretching endlessly below. He realized then that the silence following that night on stage wasn't empty. It was revealing. It showed him who expected him to perform compassion, and who understood that compassion was not a performance. The world wanted explanations. Michael chose meaning instead, and without knowing it, he was already stepping toward a moment that would force everyone, fans, critics, and himself, to confront a single truth. Silence is only frightening when it exposes what we've been avoiding. The night returned to him in fragments. Not as noise, not as movement, but as feeling. Michael Jackson often replayed concerts in his mind, but this one refused to behave like the others. There was no choreography to remember, no cue missed, no note held too long. Instead, there was only the sensation of standing still while thousands of people waited, unsure of what they were witnessing. Weeks had passed since the incident in the arena, yet followed him everywhere, not in headlines, in quiet conversations, in the way people lowered their voices when they spoke to him, in the way fans now looked at him, not just as a performer, but as a question. One afternoon, Michael returned alone to the empty arena. No lights, no music, no audience, just rows and rows of seats, frozen in memory. He stood at center stage and closed his eyes. For the first time, he allowed himself to fully feel it. Not the pressure, not the fear, but the certainty that had risen in his chest the moment he stepped toward the edge of the stage that night. He hadn't thought. He had known that if he didn't act, he would betray himself. Michael knelt and placed his hand on the stage floor, as if grounding himself. "People think I stopped the show," he whispered to the empty room. He shook his head slowly. "No, I stopped pretending." That was the truth. For years, the world had asked him to separate art from humanity, to dance while pain existed somewhere else, to sing while suffering waited patiently offstage. But that night, the boundary had collapsed, and once it did, there was no going back. A few days later, Michael received a handwritten letter. The handwriting was shaky. Inside it read, "I was there that night. I was the boy you came down for. I don't remember much because I was scared and overwhelmed. But I remember your hand. I remember you saying, 'You're safe.' No one has ever said that to me before." Michael sat down as he read the words again and again. He didn't cry. He smiled, because the letter confirmed something he already knew. Moments didn't need to be loud to be permanent. That same week, he quietly declined several upcoming appearances. He chose smaller spaces instead. Children's hospitals, community centers, rehearsal halls where music existed without spectacle. Some called it retreat. Michael called it alignment. One evening, as he tucked Blanket into bed, his youngest son asked softly, "Daddy, why do people clap when you help someone?" Michael brushed his hair gently. "Sometimes people clap because they don't know what else to do." Blanket thought about that. "Do you need them to clap?" Michael smiled. "No, I need to sleep knowing I did the right thing." Blanket nodded, satisfied, and closed his eyes. Later, Michael sat alone at the piano, playing nothing in particular, just chords, gentle and unstructured. The music drifted through the house, unfinished and honest. He realized something then. The world would always debate him, but the people who mattered, the ones who were hurting, the ones who needed to be seen, would remember him differently. Not for the spins, not for the records, not even for the music, but for stopping. Months later, footage from the arena resurfaced online. Not the collapse, not the chaos, just the silence. Viewers noticed how no one screamed, how no one moved, how thousands of people instinctively understood that something sacred was happening. Comments flooded in. I've never seen a crowd respect silence like that. That wasn't a concert. That was humanity. He didn't save a fan. He reminded us who we are. Michael never responded publicly. He didn't need to. One final letter arrived near the end of the tour season. No name, just a sentence. You taught me that danger isn't compassion. It's indifference. Michael folded the letter and placed it with the others. A quiet archive of proof. That night, as he looked out over the city lights once more, Michael understood that the most powerful moments of his life would never be the ones rehearsed. They would be the ones that interrupted the performance. Because real impact doesn't ask permission. It simply steps forward when everyone else freezes.